my channel. Today I'm going to share with you, but it's a bit of a discussion, it's a bit of a confession, it's a bit of a survey of all of you out there. And what I want to talk about is cookbooks. I've seen a lot of the people I follow on BookTube are lovely cooks and bakers, and they make beautiful things. They love cookbooks, they love reading cookbooks for pleasure. And this actually even came up recently with my boss, who was saying that she loves to just read cookbooks for pleasure. She purchases them, reads them, maybe never even makes any food out of them, but just loves reading them. And that got me to thinking about my own cookbook collection and about my own very tumultuous relationship with cooking. And so I just thought I'd share that with you today. So I will start this off by saying that I don't love to cook. I don't. I never was really a huge cook, and I've learned to cook out of necessity, out of the fact that I was a stay-at-home mom for 9 years, and part of my duties as being a stay-at-home mom were to do the majority, so I would say 98 to 99% of the cooking, and for our family. So that started out just being cooking for the two of us when we were a couple, and I think we went out to eat a lot at that time too, so I really wasn't cooking as much as I started to cook once I became a stay-at-home mom. And at first I was cooking for 3 and then for 4. My one caveat to not liking to cook, because I do prefer baking to cooking, but my one caveat is that I do love to prepare a big meal for a family or friends to come and eat. So I think for me, the pleasure of cooking and baking is when I can do it in a very social way, when I can share it with a group of people. And I don't think I'm an excellent cook or a baker. I think I just am average. And what is exciting for me when I'm making these meals is not that I'm going to make this beautiful Instagram-worthy meal, but just that I'm going to be making food to enjoy socially with people that I care about. And that is really the main part of it for me. I do get some comfort from some foods based on childhood nostalgia and all those things. But for the most part, cooking for me is something that I am required to do contractually. I have to feed myself and my children, and so I do it. And it is not something that I get much pleasure out of most of the time. Especially around 2 or 3 years ago, I started to feel really burnt out. And I find now that the constant need to think about food can be very stressful for me. I just don't get much pleasure out of it. But we all have to eat, and cooking is just a part of being and existing. And if I was, a rich person, I would definitely pay someone to purchase food and make food for me. That would be one of the chores of adulthood that I would pass on to someone else, a professional who loves it. Because I do think that when you love to cook, you make better food. You just have more of a passion, you have more artistic integrity and creativity in the kitchen, and you are able to make lovely things. If I make lovely things, it's usually a coincidence, luck, or because I really tried hard. But I'm not a precise or perfectionist person. And so when I'm cooking and when I'm baking, I'm actually super messy and I'm not that precise. So what I wanted to talk about today, along with the just general discussion about cooking, was cookbooks. And I think there's a few different categories of cookbooks. And I just wanted to illustrate that and see if any of the people who on BookTube who love cookbooks agree with these categorizations, or if you would not so much agree. I'm just sharing with you what I have in my collection, what I've whittled it down to, because I certainly have more cookbooks than I'm going to talk about today, and I certainly have had different types of cookbooks prior to this. But as cooking has changed, as the internet has become so prevalent in our lives, I often will look up recipes on the internet now. I'll just Google. If I want to make something with an ingredient that I have in the fridge, I'll Google it and find something. And that is probably more of a trend now for certain types of people. Certain age groups and generations are going to stick to cookbooks. Others are going to use mainly internet recipes, I'm sure. But the cookbook kind of subset of people are really specific, and they love cookbooks for a very specific reason. And so here we go. I'm going to tell you my favorites, and the ones that I don't think are that important to me. So the first category of cookbooks that I have that I want to share with you today are the beautiful, lovely, visually stunning cookbooks. And that would be like the majority, I think, of modern cookbooks today. This is what they look like. So this one was a hand-me-down from my friend Heidi, who is an amazing cook and baker. It's one of her passions to cook, and so she went through her collection. This one just wasn't one that she was using very much, and she knows how much I love Paris, and so she gave me this one. Now, it is stunning visually, and I have some cutouts that I'm going to insert here of some footage of the inside of the book that I'm going to show to you. So obviously, these are French recipes. These are recipes that sound amazing. Chocolate mousse with cacao nibs, onion and creme fraiche tart, sweet and savory open-faced sandwiches, spring lamb stew, crispy rabbit with Mo mustard. So just amazing recipes, fantastic, and visually the imagery is just amazing. The reason that I will never cook anything from this cookbook is because the recipes are rather involved, and they don't involve very practical food for us as a family to eat. A lot of these dishes are just not part of my general repertoire with food. And one of the things about not being in love with cooking is that I don't feel super adventurous a lot of the time to try new recipes. If I get bored, sometimes I might, but there's always a practicality level involved with me with cooking that a lot of books like this just don't have in them. Along those same lines is this beautiful book, and I've had this one for years. I believe this is an Australian magazine, Donna magazine. And this was given to me by my friend Heidi that I just mentioned as well as a gift. And she got one for herself and she got it for me. And at that time I was cooking more, and I was trying new recipes, and I was being more adventurous in cooking. And I went through that phase for quite a while. And so at the time, this was probably an appropriate gift, but I have never made anything from this book, as far as I can remember. And I love the way it's designed. It's absolutely beautiful. In terms of practicality for cooking, I don't really find it's that practical. It's very large. It doesn't sit open very well, and the spine has actually been cracked, and you know, the pages could even start coming out. It's just not a very practical book, but such a beautiful book, and just so inspiring to people who love to cook that, you know, I totally get why cookbooks are made this way. I just don't really jive with them myself. Okay, so category 2 for cookbooks are cookbooks that are visually appealing, but they're also practical in terms of what's inside of them. So I would say one of the main cookbooks that I have that I feel is like this is Alice Waters' The Art of Simple Food. Notes, lessons, and recipes from a delicious revolution. So Alice Waters was one of the forerunners out of California for slow food movement. And this book is full of practical recipes, learning simple steps on how to make basic foods. Now, I made her leek and potato soup out of this book last week, and I filmed that so you can see it. And I will tell you that, like I said, I do improvise with that recipe. So what I do with that recipe is a little bit different. This soup in her book is supposed to be a clear soup, but I actually puree the soup because we just prefer the kind of potage style of soup to clear soups, clear vegetable soups. The other recipe in this book that I absolutely love and use all the time is her tart dough, her pie dough recipe. So this recipe was actually the dough recipe that broke me through to making my own pie crust, and it is to this day the one that I use for making pies. I think that her method, her way of explaining it, and her recipe just works really well for me. You know, I definitely haven't probed as deeply as I could into this book, but as you can see, it's very visually lovely. And again, I've put some cutouts in here of the interior of the book. And the other thing that I'll tell you that I do in cookbooks that I don't do in any of my other books really is I do annotate them. And I usually write down the date that I make a recipe for the first time. And then I have, in some books, I review the recipes. I also will write down any time that I've changed it or that I've adjusted it according to my needs. And you'll see that in the recipe for the potato leek soup that I've changed a few things that I do. And that's just to remind myself the next time I make it. And it's also, you know, if someone in the future got this and then they saw the recipe and then they thought, oh, they've added something or they took something out or they substituted something, they could try that as well. So I have to say I'm not as precious about my cookbooks as I am about other books. I had to actually clean a lot of my cookbooks before I made this video because they were covered in food and they are very dirty. And I know that's probably not a good way to maintain my books for a long time, but it, you know, when you're cooking with something, splatters get on it, or, you know, I'm referring back and I have something on my hands. So as I said, I am a messy cook, and so my cookbooks really reflect that. One of my most treasured cookbooks is this one, Cooking Like a Goddess by Cat Johnson. And this book is really from a certain time period of my life. One of my friends in college purchased this when we were in New York City for an art trip. And I remember when she bought it, I totally coveted it. I thought it was amazing, and I hadn't even been in the store with her when she bought it, so I couldn't buy it myself. And that was way before you would order books online or anything like that. But she ended up giving it to me because she knew how much I loved it. And this book has the recipe that I use for pumpkin pie every fall. So that is one of my most frequently used recipes from here. And I don't know how many others I use, but what is beautiful about this cookbook actually is that it has a lot of lovely thematic descriptions of the seasons. And so you're kind of going through the seasons with this author. She's describing all the magical and kind of seasonal loveliness that happens each year, as you know, especially in the fall when it starts to get cold and the leaves turn color and you're making soups and you're making stews and you're making warm yummy food. She really talks about that and invokes that in this book. So there's a lot of spiritual nature references in this cookbook. So this one is just a little bit different and has a little bit of a different feel to it than a lot of other cookbooks, but still very, very practical. And all the recipes in here are very, very practical recipes. There's nothing that's overly complicated or overly sophisticated. This is a book that I would recommend to anyone who has young children and babies. This is Feeding the Whole Family, Recipes for Babies, Young Children, and Their Parents, Cooking with Whole Foods by Cynthia Lair. And this book was one that I purchased when my oldest son was probably 1 or 2. And it has a lot of basics in it: how to cook quinoa, how to cook all of the different grains. It has vegetarian things, sweet things, a lot of sauces. One of the recipes I use the most in here is her coconut peanut sauce, which I use for tofu stir fry with rice whenever we have that. So, you know, she really focuses on whole foods and preparing things naturally and getting a lot of nutrients out of your food. And also there's nutritional information in here. So trying to help you understand the way children eat versus the way adults eat. It takes a lot of the anxiety out of cooking for children because she makes you understand that, you know, you don't have to worry about them getting every single amount of the food that they're looking for in every single meal. She just has a lot of practical advice in here for cooking with and cooking for children and portions, and you know, she gives you an idea. So in this meal you can take this component and feed it to the baby, or, you know, different things like that. So I found it very practical at the time, and like I said, there are still a few recipes in here that I use here and there. And it is like a really just well put together and practical cookbook for people with children. Now I have my last category of cookbooks, and these are cookbooks that are not pretty. They are not aesthetically pleasing in any way. They are just practical books with lots of recipes in them. And there's kind of two general ones that I was going to talk about, but one of them is kind of this very uniform. This is Betty Crocker's new cookbook, Everything You Need to Know How to Cook. And this is from the 1990s. I was given this as a gift from family friends when I moved out on my own. So I don't even know if Betty Crocker even makes this cookbook anymore. I have no idea. But the reason that this is like one of the best types of cookbooks is because it tells you how to cook basic things. So if you don't know how to cook at all, I really don't think you should go get a fancy, beautiful, aesthetically pleasing cookbook. I think you need one like this. I think you need one that's simple, that shows you how to make basic things. And in those, like a really good macaroni and cheese recipe. This is my macaroni and cheese recipe. You can see how gross this is. But I mean, this is the macaroni and cheese that I make. I also have my pancake recipe in here, and as you can see, there's a page that isn't even attached anymore because this is my banana bread recipe, and I've made it so many times, and it is the most practical banana bread recipe. It teaches you how to make biscuits. It has photos, it has directions, and you know, I'm sure that you can get most of this information online now, and so you wouldn't need to wreck a book to the extent that I have wrecked this one. But again, I mean, you're not going to sit in your bed and read this cookbook. Like, it's just not made for that. It's made for practicality. It's made for use, and it has really simple, you know, descriptions of things. So this might be, you know, the result of coming of age in the 1990s and the internet not really being a thing yet, or internet recipes not really being a thing yet. But to me, these types of cookbooks are just, you know, they are the most practical for people like me who are not really interested in creating lovely, fancy things, but are just interested in cooking basic, good food that doesn't take hours and hours. And this is the other cookbook I'm going to show you. And, you know, I don't even know, I don't even know if anyone has these other than Canadians who grew up rurally. So these are compiled cookbooks. This was compiled from the Ladies Auxiliary to the Royal Canadian Legion. Okay, so the Royal Canadian Legion is just this establishment that was created for veterans to attend, and then there's ladies auxiliaries, and they do a lot of charitable work and a lot of community work, and they compiled recipe books. And I'm sure if you're from a small town, someone has tried to sell you some sort of a recipe book that was compiled from all the ladies. And I mean, this is kind of a dying thing. I mean, I don't think a lot of housewives are compiling cookbooks of their favorite recipes anymore as fundraisers for their church or for their community. It's just not something that happens as much anymore. It's just not a phenomenon. But this cookbook is in high rotation for me. As you can see, it actually was a little bit too close to the stove one day and got singed, so you can tell how much I've used it. And then if you go to certain sections, such as the desserts and brownies and cookies section, you're going to see how much I've used this, and I've annotated it all over the place. And the thing about this is, it's not precious. There's nothing precious about this book. It's newsprint. It's very, very expendable to many people, and yet it is the cookbook that I use the most, out of most of my cookbooks, because it just has simple recipes in it, muffin recipes and cookie recipes, and I don't really use the cooking portion of this because I don't cook. These have recipes with a lot of Jell-O and jelly molds and things that housewives would have made in the 1980s, which is when this was compiled. But in terms of creating, eating sweets and breads and muffins and things, this is just the cookbook that I use. It's very practical. It has a recipe that you can put together in half an hour, and you can make something homemade from scratch, and it's fairly good. I mean, it's not super healthy because usually these recipes have way more sugar than they should, but whatever. I mean, sometimes you just want a treat. For you today. I just wanted to talk to you about cookbooks. I think that there's all kinds of different people in the world, and that's why there needs to be all kinds of different cookbooks. If they were all the same, if they were all practical, then that wouldn't be very aesthetically pleasing for all those wonderful cooks who love the aesthetics of food. And if they were all super fancy and aesthetic, then people would totally avoid them. People like me would just avoid them and never want to read them and never think that they could cook. So if my whole message for this video is that if you are like me and you don't really love to cook, don't worry. There are cookbooks for you, and don't feel bad if you are not super into food and love it and think it's amazing, because sometimes we just aren't aesthetically into it, and I think that should be okay, and I don't think you should feel bad if you are not in love with something. I spent many years trying to make myself love making food more than I did. And then I got to a certain point and I wanted to pursue my art career. And I thought, if you just stop making these elaborate meals, then you'll have more time. And that was one of the things I was willing to sacrifice. So please let me know down below what your favorite types of cookbooks are. If you enjoy reading them as just a book that you read in bed for pleasure, I think that's very interesting and not my jam, but I'm sure there's other people who love it. And yeah, I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back again soon.